Hello, Wanderers. Welcome back to the Beginner's Guide to the Lord of the Rings. You know what? It's been a while since I saw any new reviews on episodes. Please take a moment to give this show a rating and a review, and I may read your review on a future episode. Every rating and review helps more Wanderers find this podcast. Today, we return to Beren in the darkness of Sauron's dungeons, and we'll see Lúthien challenge Sauron in an attempt to rescue Beren. I'll be analyzing a portion of the chapter called Of Beren and Lúthien, in a book called The Silmarillion, written by J.R.R. Tolkien and published after his death by Ballantine Books in 1977. A link to purchase The Silmarillion from Amazon is in the show notes. Welcome. In the Beginner's Guide to the Lord of the Rings podcast, we explore the foundational, epic stories from the deep past of Middle-earth. If you enjoy J.R.R. Tolkien's books, or maybe Peter Jackson's movies, or perhaps you're excited for Amazon Studios' new series, The Rings of Power, and you want to dive deeper into the rich world of Middle-earth, then listen and subscribe. Lagovanian, fellow wanderers. Today's episode date is May 5th. On this day in Middle-earth, in the year 2942, Bilbo rests in Rivendell on his return journey from the Lonely Mountain. In the year 3019, King Aragorn sits on the throne in Gondor after the One Ring was destroyed. This is adapted from Today in Middle-earth History Calendar on theonering.net. Let's check the map. These map checks are modeled after the beautiful maps that accompany the Lord of the Rings books, and I hope give you the context for today's story. If none of this makes sense, please listen to a few previous episodes and catch back up. It is the first age of Middle-earth. Morgoth, the Dark Lord, has divided the allies of elves and men. Beren, a man, has enlisted the help of an elven king, Finrod, to reclaim one of the precious Silmarils from Morgoth's crown, so that he can claim the willing hand of the elven princess Lúthien. However, Beren and Finrod have been captured by Morgoth's lieutenant Sauron, and their companions are being picked off one at a time by Sauron's wolves. Some common motifs to look for in today's portion of the story are disguise and deceit, release from bondage, the power of song, and overcoming darkness with light. We pick up the story today with Beren in the dungeons of Sauron, and, quote, a weight of horror has fallen on Lúthien's heart. Lúthien learns from her mother, Melian, a powerful Maiar or demigod, that Beren has been captured in Sauron's dungeon. She resolves to journey to Sauron's tower and free Beren, but first she needs to escape her own captivity of sorts by eluding the guards that are commissioned to prevent her from following Beren. Using all her enchantments, she causes her dark hair to grow quite long, then uses it to weave a dark robe that she enchanted with a spell of sleep. Using this dark robe, she puts the guards to sleep and escapes the kingdom of her father in search of Beren. By chance, two of Feanor's sons, Celegorm and Carúfin, were hunting in the wilderness. With them was the hound named Huan, who was a great hound born in Valinor and given to Celegorm by the Valar Orome many years before. Huan had followed Celegorm into his exile in Middle-earth, and it was prophesied that he would meet death only when, quote, he encountered the mightiest wolf that would ever walk the world. Huan found Lúthien wrapped in her robe and took her to Celegorm and Carúfin. Celegorm is immediately stricken with Lúthien and decides that if he were to marry her, his power among the elven princes would increase and be the greatest. But he deceives Lúthien and offers to bring her to Nargothrond and help her in her quest, giving no indication that he already has first-hand knowledge of Beren and his journey. At Nargothrond, Lúthien is again held captive. But Huan, being, quote, true of heart, listens to all of Lúthien's tales of Beren and helps her escape by allowing her to ride him like a horse and giving her counsel in the first of 3 times that he is permitted to speak. We'll get to these 3 times that Huan is allowed to speak, but in the first case, we're not given the words or counsel that he provided to Lúthien. All we know is that he carries her right up to the gates of Sauron's tower. But before we get to Sauron's tower, I want to point out that we've just seen Lúthien escape from captivity twice, and both times by her own action, the robe of sleepiness and disguise that she made, and in convincing Huan, the wolfhound, that Beren was a friend of beasts and worth helping. Let's call back to last week's episode when Beren met Lúthien, and she released Spring from the bondage of winter, as well as Beren from an enchanted bondage. Have you noticed the pattern yet? Lúthien is the driving force that releases from bondage, from seasons changing to men's hearts to her own captivity, and even from the bondage of Sauron. Beren and Finrod are alone in Sauron's pits now. All their companions have been taken by Sauron's werewolves. At last a wolf comes for Beren, but Finrod, quote, put forth all his power and burst his bonds. Wrestling with the werewolf, he slays it with his hands and teeth, but is fatally wounded and is dying. He bids Beren farewell, and his body dies in the dungeons of the tower that he himself built so many years before. Quote, thus King Finrod, Felagund, fairest and most beloved of the house of Finwë, redeemed his oath, but Beren mourned beside him in despair. In that moment, Lúthien stands on the bridge that leads to Sauron's tower, and, quote, she sang a song that no walls of stone could hinder. Beren hears the song, but believing he is in a dream, hearing the singing of nightingales, he sings his own song of challenge, praising the constellation of the seven stars, the sickle of the Valar. If you remember, this was a constellation that Varda, of Valar, had made as a challenge to Morgoth and sign of his fall. Lúthien hears his song, and, quote, she sang then a song of greater power. But Beren isn't the only one who hears her. Sauron does as well, and he knows of Lúthien, that she is the daughter of his worthy opponent Melian, and he decides that he will capture her, give her to Morgoth, and thus win a great reward. Again, I find these little moments of Sauron, being the second most evil being in Middle-earth, intriguing. Here he is, plotting evil deeds in the service of some master, almost like a groveling puppy, even though he's not a puppy, as we'll see in just a moment. Sauron sends wolves to the bridge to ensnare Lúthien, but Huan the Faithful slays each. Sauron learns that Huan is protecting Lúthien, and decides that he himself will make the prophecy of Huan's death come true. So, quote, he took upon himself the form of a werewolf, and made himself the mightiest that had yet walked the world. He comes to the bridge to challenge Huan. In horror, Huan sprang aside, and Sauron bore down on Lúthien. But she cast her cloak over his eyes, and Sauron stumbles in drowsiness. Huan regained his courage, and he and Sauron in wolf form battle together, until Huan is able to pin Sauron with a grip on Sauron's throat. Sauron begins changing his shape, but is unable to escape the jaws of Huan. Lúthien says to Sauron that his body will be stripped from his spirit, and, quote, his ghost be sent quaking back to Morgoth. And she said, there everlastingly thy naked self shall endure the torment of his scorn, pierced by his eyes, unless thou yield to me the mastery of the tower. Sauron yields to Lúthien, giving her mastery of the tower, and flees. Wow, isn't this awesome? Lúthien and Huan are able to bring down Sauron and take control of his stronghold. This demonstrates Lúthien's power and strength. Let's recall a line from Elrond, the great-grandson of Lúthien. In a scene in the Fellowship of the Ring movie, Elrond is speaking with Gandalf at Rivendell when he says this line, men are weak. No doubt he referred to Isildur, who refused to destroy Sauron's ring after armies of men and elves had assaulted Sauron's tower, and Isildur's father had cut the ring from Sauron's hand. But to add some richness to Elrond's statement that men are weak, he was well aware of his great-grandmother's triumph over Sauron, with her songs of challenge, an ally in Huan the Wolfhound, and an ultimatum that she would humiliate Sauron in front of his master forever. Surely, in Elrond's mind, men are weak, not only for refusing the temptation of the ring, but especially in contrast to the deeds of his great-grandmother. After Sauron flees, Lúthien declares her power over the tower, and releases the spell that binds the stones together. There's another instance of the pattern of releasing from bondage. All of Sauron's pits are laid open, and many captives are released, and yet Beren doesn't come. Lúthien finds him mourning by the body of Finrod. Believing him to be dead, she puts her arms around him and falls into forgetfulness. But, quote, Beren coming back to the light out of the pits of despair lifted her up, and they looked again upon one another, and the day rising over the dark hills shone upon them. Notice the use of darkness and light, much like in their first meeting, but in this case the transition from darkness to light is mutual. Lúthien brings Beren from the darkness of mourning, and Beren brings her from the darkness of forgetfulness. All of this is further entrenched with the symbolism of the sunrise breaking over the hills as they look upon each other again. I think Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet look rather pathetic when compared to Tolkien's Beren and Lúthien. We're not done yet. If you like this episode, please leave a review and share with your friends. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be right back.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gabsy, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
Beren and Lúthien bury the body of Finrod and slowly return to the forest within the girdle of Melian as part of the realm of Thingol. Beren, supposing that Lúthien is now safe, resolves to continue his quest alone. but Lúthien won't accept that, saying that Beren must choose to either relinquish his quest and accept a life of wandering, or, quote, to hold to your word and challenge the power of darkness upon its throne. But either road I shall go with you, and our doom shall be alike. So we see here the motif of choice, like we've seen in other tales. I keep calling out choice because we'll see how important choice will be in the family history of Beren and Lúthien's descendants, including Elrond the half-elven. We also see the motif of doom again, and the intertwined doom that Beren and Lúthien share. I share some thoughts on this doom based on a quote from Aragorn. You can hear those in my previous bonus episode. As mentioned, Beren wasn't the only captive released by Lúthien's actions. Many of the prisoners went back to Nargothrond, where they said that, quote, a maiden had dared that which the sons of Fëanor had not dared to do. Those who had been persuaded to follow Celegorm and Carúfin, quote, were released from the brothers' dominion. Orodreith, the king, would not permit the brothers to be slain, but withdrew his friendship for the sons of Fëanor. Celegorm and Carúfin rode away from Nargothrond, intending to find their kindred in the east. By chance, they encounter Beren and Lúthien. An altercation happens, in which the brothers try to kill Beren and kidnap Lúthien, but Huan the Hound intercedes, allowing Beren to despoil Carúfin of his gear and weapons. Among these was a knife named Angrist, which could, quote, cleave iron as if it were green wood. This knife is a crucial point for the story, so I'm going to break down its elvish name, Angrist. We've encountered one of these roots before, Crist, which means cleaver or sword, as in Orkist, the goblin cleaver that Thorin Oakenshield bears. Ang means iron. Thus, Angrist is Sindarin Elvish meaning iron cleaver. This is important if you remember what Beren's quest is, to reclaim a Silmaril in his hand. Where are the Silmarils now? Encased in the crown of Morgoth, a crown that is made of iron. Beren then flings Carúfin before him, claiming his horse for Lúthien to ride. The brothers begin to ride away on one horse, but in shame, Carúfin takes a bow and shoots an arrow aimed at Lúthien. Huan leaps and catches the arrow in his mouth, but Carúfin releases another at Lúthien. Beren springs in front, takes the arrow direct to the chest. Huan chases the brothers away, then returns to Lúthien with an herb. With this herb, her arts, and her love, she heals Beren. Beren resolves again to go on alone, and even makes it a distance before Lúthien and Huan catch up in disguise. Beren is reluctant for Lúthien to continue, and for the second of 3 times, Huan is permitted to speak. Quote, from the shadow of death you can no longer save Lúthien, for by her love she is now subject to it. But if you will not deny your doom, then either Lúthien, being forsaken, must assuredly die alone, or she must with you challenge the fate that lies before you. I hope that all of you, like Beren and Lúthien, can also find someone who with you will challenge the fate that lies before you. Beren and Lúthien now disguise themselves, Beren in the wolf helm of Sauron's chief wolf, and Lúthien as a batfell who had been a messenger of Sauron, and, quote, they pass through all perils and come to the gate of Angband. Please join me in the next episode, where Beren and Lúthien will face the Dark Lord Morgoth, and discover if they are able to win a Silmaril from the Iron Crown. My friends, if you enjoyed this episode, let me know by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing with your friends. For feedback on the show, please email me at lordoftheringspodcast@gmail.com, or find me on Instagram at Beginner's Guide LOTR Podcast. Until next week, remember, not all those who wander are lost.